Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for coming to X.Commerce, and thanks so much for coming to our session. We're hopefully going to give you as much as we can in 45 minutes about building immersive experiences. You may see a difference on the presenters than what was listed on the...
Yeah, my voice is not as high as Teresa's.
So, sadly, Teresa had a family emergency and couldn't join us. Now, the good news is that she is an O'Reilly author, and she has a co-author, and I was fortunate enough to get Mr. Bill Scott to come in her place, and he has a tremendous amount of information around this subject. And so, let Bill talk a little bit about his experience.
So the last 4 years I've been at Netflix as the director of UI engineering, UX engineering there, and actually starting on the 24th I started PayPal to head up web development for PayPal. Before that I was at Yahoo as an Ajax evangelist, and so my area of emphasis has always been around UI engineering and user experience design and how those two worlds work together and play together. I actually can't make up my mind which one I like doing better is the problem.
Well, we're really excited to have him in the eBay family when he joins PayPal. Why don't we get started? So let's talk a little bit about immersive experiences.
Yeah, so here's a layer which is a mobile app that allows you to take your landscape and augment reality on it. And I think this is probably the most extreme example of some of the immersive experiences we're seeing come about, where you really take the real world and you meld in with the experience, so there's a seamlessness between what you have in the interface and what's in the real world. In this case here, we're layering metadata about these ruins here, and you can read information about it. Great application from that perspective. But it doesn't have to be that way. You can take something as simple as Angry Birds, and it can be very immersive, right? And here, the rules and the laws of game design come into play, something that's highly addictive that plays on some of our most obsessive-compulsive behavior attributes, trying to better ourselves and knock the silly pigs over. I know myself, I've spent many immersive hours on flights, letting time go by pretty quickly playing Angry Birds. And also, when you're on a shopping experience, the beauty of online shopping is that you have all these things you can compare, prices, merchandise itself, and you can go from one site to the next, which, going from one store to the next takes a lot more work in the physical. But the downside is that you really don't necessarily know what that's going to look like in your hands or on a body or whatever. In this case, JCPenney has basically a dressing room, an experience where someone can try out the clothes. You can see this was actually Teresa's example. I would not have had the dress example, but hey. And so being able to take a live model approach where you're actually taking the merchandise and pulling it in, that's another example of an immersive experience.
And then you're seeing things, and a lot of this, it's really exciting to be alive right now, I think, because the technologies are changing so rapidly. You're seeing a lot of things like direct manipulation on the actual interface themselves. And you're actually seeing people borrow from analog sort of experiences and bringing them to the digital world, but it's intuitive and easy for them to actually understand. And, now consumers, they don't really want to have to think or read a book about what it is that they need to do in order to achieve their task. And so it becomes more imperative that when we start to produce these experiences that we're actually focusing on what the real needs are for those customers. And we're going to try to tell you some techniques that you can use today to actually do that. Hopefully nothing that takes a lot of time and can actually be part of the process that you use when you develop. The Kindle or the iPad with an example of reading is one example of that. And they've actually extended that and made this a tool to where you can bookmark, you can highlight things, you can share that in the social web. There's lots of different ways that this can extend. And we have an example with one of the products that PayPal has in its app, which is actually using the physicality of bumping two devices together, using the bump technology to actually transfer money. And this came about from actually watching users interface and seeing them struggle in terms of how they were actually trying to give each other money. And it's like, why don't we just make this a physical action, because these technologies will enable us to do that. And so I don't know if you've downloaded the PayPal app, but it allows you to just bump to transfer money. It's a pretty cool experience. It's very immersive as well.
And here's another example that uses the technology that's available. This is an iPad 2 and it has the flip cover, right? And so what Evernote did was they took the whole idea of just a simple idea of a flashcard, where you write a question on one side and you have the answer on the other, In this case, you flip the lid up one time, you get the question. You flip it up 2 times, you get the answer. Just a really cool, simple idea, but very engaging, very immersive. It uses a simple technology there with Evernote. It's called Evernote Peak.
Yeah, Evernote Peak. It's not Evernote P. The thing that I think is really interesting about this is that they not only created an experience that was immersive for people, but they spent time with them to see the industrial design of the devices that they had, and they incorporated that into the software in a very clever way, but again, a very natural and intuitive way. And so they didn't really have to fight against it or come up with something clever with the software. They were able to incorporate the cover to allow that to occur. So it doesn't always have to just be, you know, the technology, the software that does that. You can actually look at the context of how people are using things.
So at Netflix, where I currently work, at least until Friday, we worked on the PS3 experience, and this was one of our first attempts actually using HTML5, running a WebKit. And what we tried to do was keep navigation in place, so you could actually navigate through, pick your genre, and the movie content would come up, and then you then drill down into what we like to call the back of the box, or the movie display information. And then you could go into a movie watching experience. Now, we initially, we had all the work of, converting WebKit to PS3, as well as, writing all the HTML5 and JavaScript interface for this. So we thought we'd probably just have time to do one experience. So we had a bunch of different experiences we'd designed and prototyped. And we chose this one to go with because we thought it would be the best choice to start with. However, I'm sure there may be a product manager or two in the room. The product managers had a different idea. They thought, well, if we can do one, why don't we do 16? We actually did 4 different experiences, each with about 3 or 4 variations, so we had 16 variations. And this one we called Special. So we had time to field another one. This is called Plus. And a little bit more immersive around the content, and this is the point I'm trying to bring out here, is that you never really leave the content. You don't actually have a navigation of the genres and such. And a very, very simple experience. And most of us felt like, well, we want to be able to navigate genres and such. The way we measure things, and we'll talk about testing in a little bit at the end, the way we measure things at Netflix is around our A/B testing and around metrics. And specifically on the member side, you're trying to keep people subscribed. As you probably know in the news, that's a hot topic right now. We keep people as members of Netflix, right? And the real way you do that is, of course, the value of the service. If people are actually consuming movies, watching TV shows, and enjoying it, they tend to retain. So consumption is a proxy metric for us for people retaining as a member. And so in this case, because this was much more immersive when we actually put the two together, and we had some living rooms had one and some living rooms had the other, this was a clear winner. Consumption went up, retention went up, and it continued to confirm our experience of the last 4 or 5 years, probably longer than that, but especially the last 4 or 5 years, is that especially in a media consumption arena, people don't want to work for their media. They'd rather you just show them a good suggestion rather than work a little bit harder to find a great suggestion. And every time we've tried to make a more movie-finding experience, it's always failed. Now, continuing to experiment with those, and there'll be many, many more experiments coming, because we do see the value of that genre sort of navigation. But I think this won a lot because it's about the content, it's about the movies, and we're trying to immerse them there and not in the controls and the data and everything else around it. It's really about that experience. Mm-hmm. Now, this is not an immersive experience. This is an anti-pattern I call Metaphors Gone Wild, and it's ABC News iPad app, in which they put the news onto a globe. Get it? World news, right? So I started with Justin Bieber, I guess, because the whole world starts with Justin Bieber. And it takes a long time to get back to Bieber. And if you notice, we go back around this way and this way and this way. And it's really kind of like an elongated fisheye, right? A horrible experience. But somebody thought this would be a really cool, immersive experience to get you into, watching news. You can only see 3 or 4 things at a time, and it's a really pretty crappy experience. Not an immersive experience.
Yeah, be careful with what you can do with technology, because sometimes it could be used for evil. I apologize if anybody in the crowd is from the ABC News iPad.
Yes.
We're going to talk a little bit about, this is a methodology that we've used a lot in producing good experiences, and it's actually one that the Stanford Design School freely shares. They were gracious enough to allow me to kind of, and Bill, to use this during our presentation. And I will be sharing a resource at the end of the hour that you could actually download the PDF that talks in detail about these things.
And we have paper form here, too.
Yeah, paper, but it does have QR codes, so it should be easy. But there's, in essence, 5 steps to producing immersive experiences or good experiences. And that first one is to empathize. You define the problem after you kind of understand your customers. You ideate, you go broad. You don't get focused, you actually go broad again. Then you bring it all together in a prototype that gives you a tangible example of actually what it is that you're producing so that you can see people interface with it. And then, of course, you test it. And that doesn't mean testing it just before you launch it. It also means once it's out there, you're getting analytics around what's happening, having goals that you wanted to have set to make sure that you're achieving those and refining the experience after it's been let go into the wild. So we go to the first slide.
So before I was at Yahoo, I was at Sabre, and Sabre Airline Solutions. We were building, complex airline products, and one of those was a flight scheduling application. And as we worked on, it's basically, monthly schedules of, hundreds of flights, and which hubs they go into, and which equipment should be scheduled. Not a simple application. The people that are actually using it are very sophisticated and know their business well. One of the things we got back from the engineering team as we went in to help them design this was they said, they always have 3 monitors. So we took advantage of the 3 monitors that they had, and we made it to where it goes across the 3 monitors. We can drag stuff across screens and stuff like that. And there's some engineering feats involved doing that in the early 2000s, when we did this. So Teresa, who would have been here today, she actually went on a flight out to one of the airlines to take an early prototype of this and pitch the ideas to them. And when she arrived, she was shocked because in actuality they were in cramped spaces and they had all the monitors stacked on top of each other. So they had 3 monitors, but the orientation was all wrong. And so, without being able to actually observe the user, you really get nowhere. I was another company I worked for where we were building same-day shipping services, eventually being part of UPS Service Logistics. And the customer service reps were actually downstairs. The engineering was on the 2nd floor, design was on the 2nd floor. I started, and there were a few people who just were obviously the experts on what the user, needed. And I asked the question after a few days, I said, has anybody actually gone downstairs and sat beside our call center reps? And nobody had. So I just took a day or two and went down there and took lots of notes and pictures and had a totally different view of the world and what they needed, And it was just so simple. But stating something really, really obvious, but so often we forget who our audience is and what the real goal is. It clarifies things. You get just a few basic goals instead of this laundry list of tasks that you need to accomplish.
It's really critical that you just spend some time with consumers. And I'll give you a personal story from today. One of the things that we're doing is we're actually having a survey of showing some future product ideas for PayPal Access. And I'm taking every opportunity I can get to interface with people like yourselves to see what you think about those ideas, because the information that will come from the time that I get to spend with you while you're talking about those things will inform us creating the right thing and really knowing the nuances of what's going on. And it doesn't have to be a big deal. I mean, just going and spending some time with a person in the context of where they're living and what they're doing is pretty critical. This is an example of when you get to the definition stage, and this was actually some work that Teresa actually has a consulting firm, and they work with PayPal, and they were hired to help out in terms of storyboarding what they had learned from the empathize phase, where they had gone and seen people struggling and trying to buy things in a retail outlet. And actually, a lot of this work that you're here now, you can see over around the corner, there's a booth. They've actually got point of sale sort of experiences. That's part of the process that we went through to get to that point. And this is showing, very easily, quickly kind of illustrate some stuff to kind of show what it looks like so that you can tell the story. Telling the story about what the users are doing is really critical in terms of helping people to get their head around. It also helps to kind of create situations where there's not a lot of arguing about what it is you want to do if you're in a corporate environment. So it's really good to make it as tangible as you can. But you want to do it quickly instead of investing a lot of time in trying to develop something to get to that point. So this is an example of a storyboard at a point of sale experience.
Yeah, and just to put a real fine point on this, it's very subtle, and it seems kind of silly just to have this little comic up here, right? In fact, last summer while I was consulting with Teresa, I presented to the president of PayPal, and my whole presentation was a comic, which was a little bit intimidating. You know, I didn't
got him a job.
Received. Yeah, exactly. But you know, what we tend to do is we want to take technology, or we want to take the experience and start there. And really, there's an environment that we need to start with. And doing it as a simple comic stripping can be really, really rough. In fact, you'll see one of the resources I point to is a guy by the name of Kevin Chang, a friend of mine I worked with at Yahoo for a while. He's one of the product managers at Twitter now. But Kevin has a set of workshops and talks, understanding concepts through comics, and just being able to sketch up the environment and the use case is a really powerful thing. And I just want to put a real fine point on that. It looks silly and looks kind of, you know, and most of us, you know, if you're especially engineering background, sketching is not your forte. And actually in his material, you'll see, and the material that it links to, he teaches some really simple, basic concepts that you can actually sketch even if you don't know how to draw. It's pretty
cool. Shouldn't be scared by it.
Now, when I worked at Yahoo, I worked on a product called Yahoo for Teachers that was actually a really fun project. Unfortunately, as Yahoo began to kind of implode on itself, it never made it past the full beta stage. But what we did was we brought teachers in from all around the Bay Area, and we spent a week with them, and they helped us design the product. And this product was really around being able to take any information you find on the web, curate it, we had something I built called the Gobbler, where you could just gobble material in, and then you could put this together as a lesson plan or any kind of thing you wanted to, create a public URL and blog it to your class and have people in a social network. All around the world, teachers could collaborate. And we had teachers from around the world that were collaborating on lesson plans and people that could work on homework together. So it's really a cool product. But I worked with Karen Weber on this, and Karen Weber was the head of design for Pixar for the animation tools. So all the animation tools, she designed that. And so she came with this background of storytelling. And it was really an eye-opener to me because all of the various pieces of the story, the interface, we put on foam boards, and we would line a whole conference room up with that. When Jerry Yang, one of the founders of Yahoo, came into one of our meetings, he was surprised because we had no chairs in the room, and all we had was these foam boards, and Karen just started going down the line telling the story, what we were doing. And she liked to use the phrase, getting design in the wild, because often it gets stuck in PowerPoint or gets stuck in Keynote or gets stuck in Photoshop or OmniGraffle or whatever. This is about putting it out into the commerce space where everybody meets and talks about it. And it's really low cost and cheap to do. Mm-hmm. And I really love this idea because we all knew what we were building. We all had the same vision. We all had the same story. And when a team has the same story, what their passion is, one of the things I've learned so much, and especially working at Netflix, is hiring really smart people, give them good context, they do amazing things in a short amount of time. And that's the same thing with a product. You'll get a product a lot faster if you get design in the wild. Mm-hmm.
And then we move on to the ideate phase, which means that once you've empathized and you kind of have an understanding of what we call the mental model of where people are, then you define some solutions potentially around that. It's then time to kind of go back to the brainstorming and to really expand out the ideas. When we referenced the earlier immersive experiences, you saw the augmented reality. Well, that took the ideate and kind of breaking out of the conventional thinking at that time, because most sites, in terms of like if you're going to go on travel, would show a map. They would show your location based on that map, and they would allow you to highlight things and get information about things that are in your proximity. Well, somebody had the idea of, wow, we've got this technology now that you can actually look through a camera. That camera could actually have information that's interspersed in it, and as you view, you can see directly in front of you what those things are. That's something that had to come out of an ideate, which was like getting a very broad set of ideas out there. And the way this works is, and IDEO is one of the best companies at this, and I've actually included a link on this page. They have their human user toolkit that is free. You can download it. It's a pretty extensive book, but it talks about brainstorming techniques, and there's several of those, but one of them is, it's about quantity, not quality. It's like any idea. If you want to start off the meeting with, like, we could build a a house on Mars, and that's okay, because we're going to get as many ideas out as we possibly can. But there's another technique that can be used that's very easy to do, and it's something that you can do with just a group of people in a room, and it's the 6-8-5. Bill, why don't you tell them a little bit about that?
Yeah, so it's real simple. You generate 6 to 8 ideas in 5 minutes. And you just take a piece of paper and divide it into 6 grids, right? And then you hand it around the team. And you know, the emphasis is not on your drawing skill. It's really, it's not even on great ideas. It's just on a lot of ideas. And you're perfectly welcome to do 12 if you want to. But you know, generally 6 to 8 works really good. And what happens then, you'll see a theme kind of developing, you know, as people are you know, thinking through it. It's always good to also have somebody involved, maybe who's a little bit outside the group, come in, because they'll usually have a different way of thinking, which is always helps too.
Yeah, you want a lot of different minds in there and a lot of different backgrounds in there. I find that very useful. There's also the process that you can use that is called affinity diagramming. I don't know if you all are familiar with that, but in essence, you ask a question, you have a group of people. I found it's best to have decision makers in there and engineers in there and experienced people in there and writers in there. When you do this, ask some questions and allow every idea that a person has to be put on a single Post-it note. When they kind of depleted all the Post-it notes that they have on that particular topic, they then take each Post-it note, go up to, we usually put up easels on foam board, and then they put up the Post-it and they tell what they were thinking about. When everybody's had a chance to go through that process, you then, as a group, start to build out the patterns. And it's amazing because you'll see there's a lot of similar ideas that occur, and it helps to prioritize everything, and it's actually kind of fun. A lot of these processes are fun because you're engaging with people and you're having some rapport, and it's actually something that I think gets you to better product ideas quicker in a fun way. And this is an example of prototyping, and this is kind of a down and dirty prototype. This is something that was created out of cardboard, and you can take the interface elements that you're proposing and you can actually print them out, and you can go sit down with somebody and you can actually work through how you think it should work and get some feedback. Doesn't take a lot of effort to do that, and actually every time I've ever done anything like this, it is amazing the way that you re-look at the problem, because you get the input from somebody that says, yeah, I wouldn't do that because typically I would do this, and it's just those little gems that make all the difference in the world. So paper prototyping is a wonderful way to actually get feedback from people in a very quick way. One of the things that in the user experience community that you hear is, you know, test early and test often. It doesn't have to be formal. The more you can interface with potential users of your products and start to understand where they're coming from and their mental model about those things, the better it's going to be when you go to produce the technology or the products that you're working on.
And it's also about prototyping is a lot of ideas. We early on, when maybe 2 or 3 years ago, we were struggling with this whole idea of having the instant queue and the DVD queue at Netflix, and how do you manage both those? You got limited real estate to show a box shot, and you got the ratings, and you don't want to put a bunch of buttons around it, and you know, how do you solve that? And of course, a lot of the move more recently to try to separate the two is around to try to simplify some of that, so you don't have to manage both those in the same experience, although that's not the case now. But what we did was, one of the ladies on my team, Kim, she took jQuery and she prototyped, I don't know, 100 different variations of the buttons around box shots. And we had a bunch of ideas we gave her. She took some of her own ideas, and within a day or a few days, maybe 2 or 3 days, we had those. We could go to the quick prototype internal site and test it out. From that, we went down to maybe 5 to 10 ideas that we thought were good, and we took those into usability research and testing. And then from that, we picked 2 or 3 to actually build experiences with some variations on the site. And they went into A/B testing, you know, so that we could actually measure which ones were more successful. Mm-hmm. But in the past, you know, when I first got to Netflix, we really didn't do much prototyping. It was really pretty much everything was A/B testing. But you know, as we moved into new areas, especially the TV, you couldn't keep just doing A/B testing to get somewhere, because you just kind of micro get somewhere with A/B testing. You can do some larger things, but it's sort of hard to jump really wholesale into another area. So prototyping became really part of the DNA of Netflix over the last few years because of that pressure, and it's worked real well.
And we're using that quite a bit at X.commerce now too. And then there's the test portion of this. Again, I won't go into great detail on this, but I do think that it's pretty important, and Bill and I were talking about this when we're putting this together. It's like, well, kind of know what you want to achieve with with what you're producing so that you can actually measure and make sure that you're getting there. I think that's a pretty important task that we talked about.
Yeah, it is. Especially, I've worked with some startups in consulting, and one of the things that I find often is they really don't know what business metrics they're trying to drive. What it is they're trying to really obtain. Sometimes people may be really excited about the user experience, but really you're an advertising company, and you really be thinking about how you're going to integrate advertising into a great user experience, right? And so it's around the metrics and defining, what are your business goals? What are your goals of engagement? Is it about impression? Is it about engagement? Is it about time spent? Is it about sharing? Is it about what? And a lot of even larger companies sometimes don't have that well defined, and you have somebody who's maybe just sort of the hero, designer who comes up with ideas, and it's not really validated with real consumers. I mean, eventually will be, right? Because the product will be successful or not successful. And so that's one of the tools that we've used at Netflix is around A/B testing to do that and define real clearly, obviously on the non-member side, when you're signing people up, it's about acquisition and conversion from members. But then there's a lifetime value around retention when you actually acquire a customer and their experiences around consumption. In the old DVD days, when that was our main focus, it was really around adding something to your queue. And we couldn't really know. We didn't have visibility in your living room to know whether you played a movie or not. You could come back and rate it later. But how do you take something in the experience, the moment you make a change, how does that affect that downstream event of you actually getting value out of the system? So what we did was we took adding to the DVD queue as a proxy metric for that satisfaction, which leads to retention. Later, as we moved into instant, we could, know that you started to play something and you actually finished it, or you watched more than 15 minutes of something, or you watched something similar to that, or you added it to your instant queue, or you rated it, and a whole bunch of events, begin to be feeding into it, and you get the instant feedback. But in each case, we never actually design anything without having an hypothesis about what we're trying to do from a user or a business perspective. It's never just, oh, this would be cool, or we think this would be fun to do. It has to have some real value. And that informs your testing strategy. And without that, you're really sort of done all this stuff, but you don't really know what you're even measuring to know if you're successful. And this point about refining, you can't really refine and improve unless you've got something to measure against. Now, that you can't take the heart and soul out of everything. It's not all just on the the numbers, right? You have to obviously go beyond that. But from a testing perspective, you need something to root it in.
Yeah, and it's great when you actually do have something out in the wild, as it were, that you can actually get feedback from customers. But it's important that you listen to your customers and make revisions to the experience so that it helps them to actually achieve the goals in a more efficient way. And even the best designers in the world, with all the testing, aren't going to get things right. It's really critical that you continue to kind of keep your finger on the pulse of what's happening with the products that you put out there and think about how to refine and make them better.
So yeah, we've got some resources, but this is actually a better...
I guess after the meeting, we can hand these out if you're interested in getting some of the books. Obviously, 45 minutes isn't a whole lot of time to talk about something as complex as trying to create immersive experiences or go over all the different techniques that are out there. But there are some wonderful resources on the web that are free that can get you started and go into great detail about some of the things that we talked about. Bill and I purposefully wanted to try to not have this last the entire 45 minutes so that we could answer questions, because you may have particular questions that perhaps we could give you some insights on. So, at this particular juncture, we'll open it up to questions, and this gentleman in the back will give you a microphone so that when you ask the question, people that are actually going to view this later or on the web right now will be able to hear what you asked. Any questions? Gentleman in the front, please. Yep. And we got this guy too. Okay, we're good.
Assuming that...
Is it on?
Yep.
Assuming that your prototypes come before testing, how do you suggest eliminating prototypes without introducing bias?
It's a good question.
Yeah. So, if you have enough context about users and, what they're doing from that empathize phase, right, you actually have a good chance to get rid of your biases at that point. Because a lot of your biases go into not observing users in the real environment and being able to dispense with that. The other thing is, when you know at the very end of everything, there's some solid measurements that you're measuring against. That's not just, I'm the Uber designer and I have an idea, and you think you're an Uber designer, you have an idea. We actually have some real things to measure against. So to me, the context leading up to it is really important in the back-end aspect of it.
Yeah, I think that, again, some of those techniques in the empathize phase can be really critical to doing that. Building out a mental model of kind of how people think about that particular space will usually point you in the right direction so that you can have things that are going to be a little more in line. But, it's funny because like Steve Jobs is famous for saying that he doesn't really use a lot of testing and research to develop their products because the customers didn't know what they wanted. There's other companies like 37 Signals that actually just develop things for themselves. So, that can sometimes work. I think a lot of great products have come out of just developing things for yourself and knowing that that's going to be something that others might find useful or not, but at least it satisfies the person that they're making it for themselves.
But the people with that innate sense who like Steve Jobs, like Apple has done it many times. There's sort of the DNA of just understanding the customer, and that's sort of like it's part of the lifeblood, and that influences the way they think. And you could take somebody else in the same environment, and they wouldn't produce anything like that, obviously, because they wouldn't have that innate sense of what's going to work. But for if you want to scale that up, you can't scale that up. You can't have every organization have the Uber designer. What's your likelihood of getting the right one? You probably have somebody who's, actually going to take you down the wrong path. So you need some balance to that.
And honestly, I've found that, when you get into the nuances of biasing people based on prototypes, just interfacing with customers in general and getting things out there and getting feedback is huge.
Yep.
So it's like, don't worry about that. It's like you don't have to get totally, it's like, oh my gosh, we're going to bias or we won't get, sometimes it's not scientific. A qualitative analysis of just talking to a few people can make all the difference in the world. I'm a big proponent of the sooner you can get it in front of people, the better.
Yeah, exactly.
And make it tangible enough that you can have a conversation around it. And, again, I encourage everybody in this room to come by the booth, the X.Commerce booth, go through this survey. One of us would conduct it and ask you questions about it. You give us your email at the end, and then you could win an iPad too. So we'll actually give you a little incentive. It's good to build in incentives too. I hope that answered your questions best we could.
And on an iPad also?
It's an iPad 2. Okay. And then we got another survey for a pair of Bose headphones if you do our informatics survey. And these will only take you about 5 minutes. So is there another question? This gentleman over here.
Hey, you guys have the Bootstrap up there. Is that the Twitter tool that they released this week for doing CSS? Yeah, Bootstrap PDF down there. And the last bullet point, are you referring to the Twitter tool that
No, I'm not. That's it's actually a typo. What I'm referring to is a PDF over the bootleg boot camp from the D School. On the sheet, it has a QR code that'll take you directly to that, but no, sir, it's not that.
This is an artifact of Casey and I on Monday or Tuesday finding out we're doing this talk, right, together, and doing it over the phone.
Yeah, so,
I apologize for that last.
It's a little, it's a little off the cuff, but, things happen. Are there any other questions?
Yep, here.
Okay. This gentleman up here, please.
Hey, how you doing? Thanks for everything. With some of the stuff you guys have been seeing with the X-commerce and the integration of all the different things with Magento, any things or tools that you guys have seen out there that take Magento to the next level, especially with like A/B testing and trying out prototypes? Have you seen any cool plugins or services that can just help somebody who has a Magento store test things out in a better way?
Good question. I'm not a Magento expert, I have to be honest with you. I'm a 6-year veteran of PayPal that recently joined X.Commerce in terms of for the identity informatics, the PayPal Access product. One thing that I would say is just if you can create prototypes very quickly, I've found a product like Balsamic, which is this very easy wireframing tool to kind of put things together that you can actually share quickly through PDFs to get feedback. That can be very useful to kind of put ideas around navigation, or if you know that there's a problem in terms of your analytics about people not finding the things that they're looking for in a discovery phase, you could put some new ideas together quickly and rapidly prototype those things and get them out there, and they make easy click-throughs. It's not specific to Magento, I know, but it is something that we've found very useful when we're trying to put ideas together quickly.
And I was at Netflix. I haven't really had much with Magento other than last summer when I was consulting for PayPal. But I mean, the Google A/B testing framework, I would imagine should be able to integrate with that, but I haven't tried that specifically. I mean, it was pretty good when I looked at it a year ago, but I haven't looked at it since then.
If you come later, then give me your name. I'll go find somebody that can probably answer that specifically.
So, Casey, I didn't put your Twitter thing. I don't know what it is. So.
No problem. It's Casezilla, K-A-S-E-Z-I-L-L-A. So if you want to follow me on Twitter.
So I'm just Bill W. Scott all over. So,
dude, you are social.
I'll tell you. Just,
any other questions? This gentleman, all these people in the front row, they're not afraid to ask questions. Let's get you a microphone.
Here we go.
Hey guys, when you're prototyping, what's your perception? Is it, how would I use this? Or is it, how do you think the people will use this? Or 3, what has my past test results showed me so yeah.
It's 2 and 3.
2 and 3.
It's number 2 and number 3,
it's
right?
Number 1?
Well, it's not, unless I'm 37 signals, it's not going to be how I would use it, right? I mean, those guys do a great job, but their approach is basically around, designing for themselves because they're building tools that they use, right? So they really are the user. So you definitely want to get outside of the head of how you're going to use it because you're probably wrong. Now, number 3 says that you've got a good bit of experience from watching testing, watching how users work. You can make a pretty good hypothesis. For example, we hired a guy who's gone on to do great things, actually head of user experience now at Netflix. He came from Adobe and he was building CS3 and stuff like that, designing CS3, et cetera. So his first approach at designing things was to bring a lot of his knowledge of building desktop applications. And what we had learned a lot at Netflix was it had to be dead simple. And all the cool things we could think of we wanted to do, you almost couldn't do, right? You had to keep it really brain dead. So he learned that really quick, because he would put things that were really kind of more control focused or, they'd be a little bit more gadgety or something like that. But he learned that really quickly that, it had to be as simple as a link or, you couldn't put more than a couple of things in view or people wouldn't get it. So that DNA of understanding that simple wins, that suggestions are better than trying to find, recommendations better than trying to search for something. Generally speaking, these are very, very broad things, or things we learn. Now, they do bias us, obviously, and then what we try to do is from time to time construct ideas or tests that go completely against all those things we've learned, because context continually changes, right? Like the rating is like, for the longest time it was like, well, obviously you have to have rating, right? But now you see some of the latest designs as we took what we learned on the TV and took it back to the website. Real big box shots, hover, you get a play button, you have no rating at all there. Because with play and other things, you get enough metrics about the direction, the vector, what somebody's interested in, that you can do away with it. But that was kind of a holy cow to kind of, sacred cow to get rid of, right? But so you play on 3 for a while. You're because you learn. There's no reason to start from scratch, but you always want to re-challenge those assumptions. And the only way you do that is by, really getting in front of users.
Yeah, and on the IDEO link that we'll send you, they do a design thinking methodology, and one of the things that we've found that's very effective to kind of answer your question specifically is you want to design towards a persona or an archetype of the user of your product. A lot of people just kind of think it up and they write it down and it's like, oh, that's my persona. That's not the best way to do it. You can actually do something where you invite 4 people into could be similar to this. You have prepared questions about kind of a space that you think that there's some problems. And you have a moderator interview the 4 people that are potential users around those questions. And a good moderator is going to kind of dive deep and funnel in and pick out little pieces that are a little different. And obviously a bunch of people in a crowd, when they see questions being asked, new questions arise. Well, what happens once you've done the moderation with these people and they've answered all the questions is you break up into groups. If you have 4 people and let's say that there's 30 people in the group, you break into small teams divided by 4, and you actually interview that person in depth. And when you're done with that, you do what I talked about before, which is affinity diagramming about, hey, what was the problems that you heard? And each person writes down those ideas and they put them up, and then they have a chance to tell their story, and then you give a pattern. And what happens after that is you've got a very narrowed idea about what a product is that's going to satisfy this need that you heard that this person has because they've told you their heart and soul about that thing because you've seen it. And it's an amazing transformation for other people as well, because when you get into discussions, and we all have these heated discussions about the design and what we need to do, but everybody does it through their interpretation or what they saw the user actually say and talk about. So Sally said, well, her kids don't come home till 3, and it's like, it's an amazing transformation because it's all user-centered, because you're actually having these discussions through the eyes of the person whom you're making the product for. And so in that sense, you kind of narrow it down, and when you create a prototype, it's like, well, we did the pattern and we're going to create this thing. Well, that prototype is made up to kind of show the collective group's idea about what it is that they want to do. And the way, when you play that out, actually, then each group gets to get up and present their idea in a tangible format of a prototype, and it could be paper. And then, you know, the executives or whoever look at those ideas and they kind of decide on which direction based on the business case that makes sense to go forward with. Anyway, IDEO does a great job of kind of talking about that methodology in their this document that you'll see if you get one of these sheets. So it's pretty good.
And one last thought on that is, you know, I'm kind of known as a patterns guy. You know, at Yahoo, I launched the Yahoo Design Pattern Library. So I'm very much on patterns and principles, design principles. But they're just a tool. They're just like, you know, your toolbox. They don't drive the way you design. They just inform and help. So I think if you balance the two, you know, user-centered design and good principles and patterns and lessons learned, you get a really good, you know, balance of design. I think we're at the time.
We're pretty close. I think we might have time for one more question if anybody wants to ask another question or otherwise.
Right here. Yeah,
we got
front row here, yeah.
You've got the microphone. I'll let you go, and then we'll go and get you, Matt.
Yeah.
Sometimes had happened on our office that we come out with a solution that is very similar to a project before.
Yeah.
So do you go to a clearing process, or you clear up your mind so you can start fresh? Because I mean, and it works, but I think it's not the ideal solution because we had a success before, so it filters in to our new projects.
Yeah, I mean, some of that could be good if it's been successful before, you know, leaning on that. But I do think, again, if you're telling the story from the user's perspective, if you're getting back to observing, empathizing with users, right, that's part of the clearing process, I think. But it's hard because you're going to have these things you know and are well. This is where it's really good if you can get somebody to come in who has a totally different perspective, even somebody you respect in the industry, you know, or maybe from another, you know, non-competitive group or whatever, it comes in and sort of helps with the fresh ideas, you know, because I don't know how to, we're humans, I'm not sure how to completely get rid of the bias, you know.
Yeah.
So one more, you want to take one more question and then we'll...
Well, let me just
sure.
elaborate a little bit on that as well. You know, I think that I've seen Edward Tufte talk a bunch, and he's a famous information graphics person that actually is pretty renowned in the space in terms of talking about how to take dense information and presenting it. But he says, you know, don't get it original, get it right. So if you're saying that there were reasons that this was successful, you know, to Bill's point about patterns and modularity, it's like, great, we don't have to rethink that. If we can create a pattern or a module for that particular thing, and as I said, test and learn when it's out there and hone it to make it the very best that it can be, I don't need to revisit that. And I'm going to now apply that the next time I go to produce something, and we're not going to think about it. We're going to think about other things. So you can kind of elevate your game a little bit. So I'd say the one thing to do is that as much as you can, create patterns and modularize the work that you do. Make sure that they're the very best of what they can be. And then once you've kind of amassed those, you can put those together quickly to make new things, and it's perfectly fine. So we'll answer the last question, which was this lady in the back here.
Hi, I'm a UX designer. One of my problems is I work with a lot of startups, and they actually don't have a lot of budget for UX. So, I mean, I can do personas and obviously stakeholder interviews and all of that other stuff, but in the end, you know, you might only have, you know, 2 months to release something, and they don't have a lot of time to spend 6 weeks on a user experience exercise. What would you recommend for smaller businesses that allows them to kind of use the user experience process, but in a very, you know, cheap way?
Yeah. Well, one thing that I think that's really useful in that situation is to get them involved in the process. Because if you're talking to customers or you can actually do these stakeholder analysis, is bring them with you. Yeah. Because once they get engaged in the process, they might go, we probably need to actually add a little time to it, because I now have taken ownership of the fact that we talked to Sally and she has 3 kids and is this thing. And it's like, the more you can involve them in the process, the better. And again, some of those techniques that I talked about are great ways to do that. And it can actually give you a longer runway. At the same time, we're all in the reality of not having a lot of time. I mean, I now work for PayPal Access, and man, we're go, 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 and we don't get the opportunity to do it quite as extensive as we would like as well. And what we try to do is create tangible examples as quickly as possible and get them in front of users, and then make sure that the people that are making the decisions get to be part of that so that they can inform those decisions. A lot of times, they'll push out timelines a little bit because they're like, it's not quite there. You guys go and kind of make it better. I've found that to be a good technique.
Well, I'm going to say that actually every company, no matter how big they are, should use the exact same model as what the startup has time to do, because we have to be very nimble. And we talked about these steps here, but you can collapse as many as you want. You can use as cheaper processes. The old Jakob Nielsen discount usability conception. Mm-hmm. That concept is good because, really at the end of the day, all it really is about is a shared understanding between engineering, product, and design. Everybody has this common vision. And a shared understanding could be a Vulcan mind meld, but we haven't figured out how to do that yet, right, with the user. So you use whatever. It could be, if you got offshore teams, you're going to have more documentation, right? More things to show. But you could do videos, you could do screencasts. It's always about thinking, what's the simplest way that I can get this done? I don't have to have some set process, and the process can change from product to product or feature to feature as needed. So I think having that mindset is actually really, really good, and I love what you said about getting them involved early, because it's not you, the designer, going off figuring something and throwing it over the wall to them. We have this throw it over the wall mentality that's really hard to break, especially in large organizations, right?
Yeah, I totally agree.
I think we're out of time, and really, really appreciate you guys showing up, and hope this has been helpful.
Thank you. And we'll have the handouts if you want to come up. We'll just put them right in the front of the stage here. Papers, if you guys want one of those.
And I'll tweet it as well as Casey will tweet it.
They're right in the corner there. And you'll tweet them. Okay,
yes.
Great. Hey.
Yeah.